Shadows of Betrayal, The Silent Echo, Part 3. By Elton Gar. Cassandra took a deep breath, glad that she was finally back in human-controlled space. She knew this was going to be difficult, but she needed to know as much as possible. That included what had happened with her first officer and how many people had died because of it. The airlock door opened, and Lieutenant Gibbs smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. He then said,
"You look like you just spent 3 days on Iridia Prime."
The Pleasure Planet?
Cassandra asked. Her security chief often came at things sideways. It was one of the things that made him so dangerous in his job.
"I visited it once. I had more bruises than after a full contact tournament, and this one scratch across my..."
I'm quite confident I don't need to know. Mine isn't from a pleasure planet, it's from a voidsmith,
Cassandra said, interrupting the chief before he got too deep into the story.
"You fought a voidsmith,"
Gibbs said, sounding a bit more serious.
Turns out they are very sensitive to cold. Also, their ship's power source is like nothing the AI has ever seen. It's not as powerful as ours, but who knows what we might find. It was enough to get the silent echo back here.
The lieutenant glanced around, then in a more formal tone said,
"I will put that in the official record, as well as noting that you turned yourself in. We're going to do what we can for you. None of us believe the charges."
What charges?
Captain Solaria asked, but she had a pretty good idea, and she would bet that the chief witness was her former first officer, Lawrence Mansfield.
"Treason, theft of a starship, and, I hate to tell you this way, 23 murder charges,"
the chief said. Cassandra had lost people before, far more than 23 in the war, but those had been in fair battles. This had been betrayal, and that made it feel worse. The problem was that she had no idea how she would prove she hadn't been the one to betray them. Lawrence would have had weeks to perfect his story, and it didn't take much to frame her. She had given the order to evacuate the silent echo, and then disappeared with the ship. Even without the word of a well-decorated officer, there would have been an investigation.
It was Lawrence. Did they tell you about his history?
Cassandra said. The security chief's job was split between keeping the ship ready for combat and protecting the crew, and knowing that a member of the crew had his memories altered was something that should have been in the security files.
"His memory was altered, but honestly, that makes him less suspicious. Memlink has a stellar reputation and wouldn't risk the company over one officer, and everyone knows that if you let them in your head, they're going to remove anything dangerous."
Officially, Memlink couldn't change anything without the permission of the patient. But they were one of the most powerful corporations in the Iranian Union. It was the device, she was almost certain of it. Something about the way that it interacted with the mind had likely compromised the memory alteration. But she couldn't explain that to her chief or anyone with a lower rank without breaking the law. The chief held out a pair of handcuffs to the captain, and as she took them, she said,
"There is something important happening. We have to figure it out."
"Like the time on Geneth 6.
The chief said. It took the captain a moment. Geneth 6 hadn't been anything like this. They had been arrested by aliens while secretly exploring Geneth 6 for trade opportunities. They had been forced to escape because they didn't believe they would be treated fairly.
I remember, and I'm sorry about this,
Cassandra said, and she hit the disconnect button on the airlock. She had no doubt that the chief would be able to beat her in a struggle, but in about 5 seconds, the doors would close, and once the ships disconnected, they'd both be expelled into space. She stepped backward into the silent echo, expecting the chief to return to the rendezvous ship, but no one ever claimed that Cord didn't know his job. He moved forward, leaving the 2 security officers she didn't know on the other ship. He pinned her to the wall of the silent echo and held her there until the airlock disconnected and the 2 ships automatically inched safely away from each other. Cassandra was caught off guard, but managed to get her hands in front of her, trying to push him back. But Gibbs was too well trained, and rather than fighting her, he allowed her to push and then snapped the handcuff around one of her wrists.
They can't see us anymore,
Cassandra said, restrained by her chief.
"I wish I could just let you go, but if I don't do my job, we'll both be executed when we're caught,"
the chief said.
Then I wish you hadn't followed me onto the silent echo,
the captain said. As she spoke, the silent countdown finished, and the warning light for the jump drive began to flash, and both of them instinctively reached for something to hold. The ship shook more than normal. The repairs were good enough but not elegant, and they were still in progress. But the ship could jump, and once the drive spun down, they went into silent mode.
You're under arrest.
the chief said, but he smiled.
The ship has been locked to my voice since I left. Without me, the ship isn't going anywhere. Or we can go to the bridge, and I can explain.
You can't really think Lawrence did this on his own. There is a reason he doesn't have his own ship. He just doesn't have the drive to do something like this.
The security chief said, but he began to walk toward the bridge.
It's bigger than you think. Have you ever heard of the device?
Rumors, but nothing more than an intentionally vague name.
Exactly. And I can't tell you more, but there is an order in the ship's computer for this type of situation.
A few minutes later, they were on the bridge of the Silent Echo. It was one of the few parts of the ship that hadn't been rebuilt from scraps of the Voidsmith ship. The security chief went to his station almost without thinking, and Cassandra moved to the captain's chair in the same movement. Both were moving on autopilot, except it turned out that Chief Gibbs wasn't entirely done yet. Because once she was sitting down, he turned, took the 3 steps over to her chair quickly, and attached the handcuff that was still around her wrist to the captain's chair. It was an odd choice if he expected that to do anything. He had handcuffed her to the spot on the ship where she could control everything.
Computer, please read out the general order in regards to the device.
A command code is required to access that order.
The AI said. Cassandra had known that, but she wanted the chief to know, and she gave the code. A moment later, the AI said,
By order of the High Admiral of the Fleet and the President of the Iranian Union, all personnel are ordered to protect the device. All other orders are suspended, as are all codes of conflict. Do whatever it takes to secure or destroy the device.
The chief looked at Cassandra and said,
Did they just give us permission to commit war crimes?
Or any other we want, including evading arrest and disobeying direct orders.
Cassandra said.
What is it? Why was it on the ship?
Gibbs asked.
It was discovered on an alien space station shortly after the first jump gate was created. The aliens had been far more advanced than us, and the device had caused their extinction. As for why it's on the ship, it is able to do a number of things none of our other computers can do, including near-instant translation of alien languages. Secondly, it's to make certain no one else uses it, because there are those who think that some may try to weaponize it.
So every ship in the fleet has a genocide device on it.
Gibbs said.
No, almost none of them, and, damn it, I should have realized.
What?
No one on the Silent Echo but me knew it had the device. That includes Lawrence, or should have. And it had only been on the ship for a few weeks.
So someone powerful wanted the device.
There are always people who want it. That's part of what makes it so dangerous.
So what is your plan?
Gibbs asked.
We only have one lead. We need to get to Commander Mansfield.
The chief should have told her she was insane. You didn't kidnap a high-ranking officer in the military, and you certainly didn't do it while you were being hunted by the entire fleet for crimes that he was the primary witness for. But instead, he said,
We'll need a good plan.
The captain would have done everything on her own if Cord had let her. Her plan, so far as he could figure it out, was to walk directly into the security offices of the people hunting her and hope that no one recognized her long enough that she could kidnap a combat-trained officer in broad daylight and then walk back to the ship with a hostage without anyone noticing. It seemed like a long shot to Cord. Cord's plan wasn't much better. The only real advantage he had was that he had escaped from the Silent Echo fast enough that they hadn't arrested him. Though he was still being watched, and ringing Lawrence's doorbell at 11 o'clock at night wasn't going to help with that. Lawrence was wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt when he opened the door and said,
Come in, Lieutenant Gibbs.
Officially, Lawrence wasn't in Cord's chain of command anymore, and according to the captain, he was a traitor who had gotten a lot of people killed, but Cord still felt his back stiffen as he took a more formal stance.
I spoke to the captain.
Gibbs said.
She's not a captain anymore.
Lawrence said.
She claims it was you, that you wanted something on the ship enough to kill for it.
Cord said. He was fishing, and if Lawrence figured that out, it wouldn't be good.
Of course she did. She probably gave you the whole line about the device being too dangerous. Did she tell you what it really is?
For a moment, Gibbs was frozen. The captain hadn't even considered telling him what the device was, and he desperately wanted to know. But Lawrence had just made a mistake. A sloppy mistake. The look on Lawrence's face as he realized that he had just admitted to knowing not only that the device existed, but what it did, appeared on his face at the same moment that Gibbs struck. They had sparred hundreds of times in the years they had served together. Gibbs had trained him, and it should have been a close fight. But as soon as Gibbs' hand wrapped around his arm in an attempt to take him to the ground, Lawrence folded inward like someone whose arm had been broken. And when he struck Gibbs, it was even more tepid. That was as strange as his lapse in mentioning the device. Gibbs moved him backwards with what seemed like no pressure on his wrist and said,
"You're going to answer some questions."
Lawrence glanced into the room, and Gibbs followed his gaze. There was a chair in the middle of the room, and just in front of it was a box with several top-secret marks on it. The second's distraction was too much. Lawrence broke free of him, but he didn't try to escape or attack. He scrambled towards the chair. His movement was frantic as he kicked Gibbs away on the way to the chair, this time with much more urgency. He still didn't know what the device did, but Gibbs knew he couldn't let Lawrence use it if it was anywhere near as dangerous as Captain Solaria said. But he didn't think he'd make it to Lawrence, so he rushed towards the device. Rather than sitting in the chair, Lawrence pushed a button on the armrest. As he pushed it, the world seemed to slow. Gibbs could feel something in the back of his mind. He had used brain-to-computer interfaces a few times, but without implants, they were clunky and slow. This was a brain-to-computer interface, but it felt more responsive than his own thoughts. Whatever it was, he had been told repeatedly it was dangerous, so he pushed it back, and he felt something odd. It was as if the device accepted his resistance as an order. It didn't disappear, but it didn't push. At the same time, Cord saw Lawrence. As soon as the device was on, he slipped to the floor, all resistance gone. He took a deep breath, allowed his eyes to slip shut, and seemed more at peace than Gibbs had ever seen him. All of that took place in the 2 or 3 seconds it took him to reach the box. As soon as he hit the button, Lawrence screamed. It was a scream like someone had lit him on fire. The world sped back up to normal, and Lawrence reached for the button again. Grabbing the device with one hand, Gibbs pulled it loose. He didn't know if he was doing damage to it, but he got it free. Sitting on the floor looking as pathetic as anyone Cord had ever seen, Lawrence said,
"You don't understand."
Cord wanted to understand, but as he looked at Lawrence, he thought perhaps this was one thing he could stand to not know. Now that he knew what to look for, it was obvious Lawrence was in a bad state. Cord could almost hope it was guilt from getting people killed, but he suspected it was the machine.
"I need to know who you're working for."
Gibbs said as he spoke. Someone knocked on the door loudly. There wasn't any time left.
"I don't. My memories are wrong. I'm not who I'm supposed to be."
There was another knock, and Gibbs said,
"I just need a name. If you give me that, I can try to keep you from being executed."
Lawrence looked up at him as Cord said, "Executed," and said,
"Yes, that's it. If I die, there won't be any more pain."
But then he slumped down and said,
"I don't think they'll let me."
This time, the bang on the door wasn't a knock. It was someone ramming it. The door held, but Gibbs's time was out, so he grabbed the device and rushed to the fire escape. He started down the metal ladder as there was another bang, this one with the sound of wood splintering and yelling. What he didn't hear was anyone saying he was under arrest. He was halfway down the fire escape when people began to come down after him. Those were private security. That was dangerous enough, but they didn't have any corporate logos on their uniforms. That made things much worse. Any corporation that could afford to make a move like that would have no trouble covering up the death of a couple of soldiers. As he hit the ground, Gibbs turned to run towards the main street, but then he thought better of it. This was an organized strike team. They would have people waiting outside, so he turned to run deeper into the maze of buildings. This city, like many in the Union, was built to be compact, with several layers of buildings between each street. Most modern cities were too uniform for that to matter much. People just had to walk further to the street. But this was one of the oldest cities in the Union, and the mix of buildings created a maze. It wasn't difficult to find your way out. Just walk a few blocks in any direction, but it was hard to follow someone. That should have been enough. Even the most powerful corporations didn't like to commit too fully. When they did, it left openings for other corporations to act against them. But one of the men yelled and began to sprint after Gibbs, who was forced to give up any attempt at subtlety as he sprinted through the narrow paths between buildings. Then he heard a gunshot. At the sound, Gibbs threw himself to the ground and grabbed for his own weapon. He wasn't carrying a gun. They were illegal in most Union cities, but he was deadly with a knife. But when he looked up, it wasn't one of the corporation goons with the gun. It was Lawrence, and he had shot one of them. Gibbs had no idea what that meant, but he hoped Lawrence might not shoot him, so he continued forward. About 10 seconds later, there was another gunshot. He didn't want to attribute too much to someone acting irrationally, but the gunshot had drawn all the attention away from Gibbs and towards Lawrence, helping Cord to escape. As soon as he hit the street, he stuffed the device into his coat. Aside from the top secret stickers, there was nothing to suggest it was anything but a random computer. He then disappeared into the crowded street. A half hour later, he was on the shuttle, moving towards the commercial jump gate that would take him to the Silent Echo. They had the device, now it was time to get some answers.
Author's note: I hope everyone enjoyed the deepening of the mystery and the full introduction to Gibbs. He's the best trained soldier in a story that is going to have a lot of action, so there should be plenty for him to do, as well as plenty of chances to learn more about him. But the real mystery is still the device. There were a lot of clues as to what it is in this story, but I'd still be impressed if anyone figured it out quite yet. That said, I don't intend for that particular secret to last much longer. There are plenty more to take its place. For now, it's just worth knowing that it's not just a MacGuffin. There will be more coming soon. Thank you, Elton Gar.